ahead in case anybody can see me right now. I'm just waiting on confirmation that I am coming to you live. I am? Good to go? All right. Okay, everybody, welcome back to our second Tyler webinar in hopefully an ongoing series. I am coming to you live right now from my own house because I'm going to be talking a little bit about the proper care and maintenance of houseplants. And I'm going to demo for you how to go ahead and pot up your houseplant when it needs to be potted up. But I'll try to keep it brief so that you guys can ask any questions you might happen to have. So just to jump in with my demo, here I have my oxalis pink pillow, which is one of my houseplants that I like to visit with every day. It's very soft. This particular cultivar is kind of fuzzy. But I know that it's time for it to go into a bigger home because you can see it's kind of overflowing this container. And when I pull it out, if you take a look at the roots, you can see that it's starting to look a little bit pot-bound to me. And this is really the thing that you're hoping to avoid when you pot up your houseplants. When they become root-bound, they're not as effective at accessing nutrients and water. So that's what you're looking to avoid. So it's time for this guy to go into a bigger home. If I wanted to right now, I could divide it and have more than one plant, but I think I'm going to keep this guy together and just pot him up. So what I'm going to do here is break up my root ball, and this is really important to do, whether you're potting up a house plant or if you're planting a perennial in the yard, but it's especially important if what you're planting is any kind of woody species like a tree or a shrub, because the health of the root is the best way to ensure the health of the plant. And when you're planting it up or planting it out in the garden, this is the time that you can kind of check in and see what the roots are doing. So I'm being fairly rough with it. I'm really breaking it up because that's what's gonna allow the roots to expand to fill its new container. So this is the pot that I'm going to put it in. It's a terracotta pot. These are really nice. I think they look really good. They do tend to dry out a little bit more quickly because the terracotta gets warm, so that's something to be with potting soil. It's really important for what you might be bringing into your house when you're bringing in soil from the outside. Potting soil is a sterile mixture, which means it contains nothing that might be a creepy crawly and no plant diseases. So this is a good thing to start with. And I am using Organic Mechanics potting soil. I like Organic Mechanics. I think they make a nice product. I also like Espoma is a good one. But pretty much any potting soil is going to be a mix of peat moss and vermiculite and a little bit of compost. And that's what's going to feed your plant, hold in water, and keep it looking nice. So I've filled my pot to just below the rim, and I'm going to center my plant in the pot. I've broken up its roots. And then all you have to do is sort of scoot. What you're looking for is to have it be the plant centered in your pot, nice and even, and pretty much right at the top. And that is what is going to ensure that you have a healthy plant. I am going to water this really well. Also, as soon as I get it potted up, it's really important to make sure you water it in really nicely because it's a bit of a shock to go from one container to another container, and you want to really fill out this container and look really pretty nice. So that's my quick demo on how to pot up a house plant. And if is anybody out there watching who has any particular questions they'd like to ask me, I'm going to go ahead and invite you to do so now. I am doing this for Tyler Arboretum, so also if you're watching and you have a minute and you wouldn't mind donating, we are right in the middle of our annual drive. So if you go to the Tyler Arboretum website, www.tylerarboretum.org, you will find all the great information there. Oh, okay, I've got my first question. So somebody asks, Antonella asks, what are the best plants for a low light situation in your house? That can be a little bit tricky, right? Because everybody, plants need plenty of sunlight to grow with, but there are some plants that do really well in a pretty low light situation. Porthos is a really nice one. Spider plant, which I actually have one of right here. This is my little tiny spider plant. It also needs a bigger home. They do really nicely in low light situations, and they also look really good in a hanging basket because once they sort of fill out the container, they will start to trail little spider plant babies over the side, and it's really very pretty. We have some really nice spider plants at Tyler Arboretum that grow hanging out back of the Latchford Terrace. So if you are at Tyler in a few months, and hopefully we all will be, those are really great ones to visit. They're really beautiful, and they fill out their container really nicely. So spider plants are a good one. Snake plant does very well in low light. The great thing about indoor plants is that they tend to be tropical in origin or semi-tropical. So that means they kind of like the same sort of weather and temperature that we do. But it also means that some of them are evolved to grow in very low light situations, because if you've managed to take root in a tropical rainforest, you are not getting a ton of light down on the forest floor. It's very dim down there. So there are some really great options out there for plants that do very, very well in a low light situation. Oh, I'm getting another question. My next question is, what can you be doing to make sure that your house plant is thriving and doing well? I hear from a lot of people that, my house plant isn't looking great. Why, what can I be doing to make it look a little bit better? It seemed like it was doing really nicely, and now it's kind of in decline. I think that's something we see a lot with houseplants because of mostly the soil and the fertility of the soil. Your garden soil in your yard kind of takes care of itself, and that's because it's sort of a living organism all of its own. It's always changing and in flux because the leaves that fall in the autumn and the critters that move through it, they're all changing the soil composition, whereas the soil that your houseplant is growing in inside is very static. So if you are not changing that soil for the plant, then it's going to eventually use up all the nutrients that are in that soil. And that's another really good time, even if you're not potting it up, but just to change the soil or apply some nice slow release moisturizer like Osmocote or a fish oil supplement does a really good job. Got another question?
Julia asked, what do you mean by low light? 1 hour, no hours?
Great question. Thank you, Julia. So Julia wants to know, what do I mean by low light? So you know your own home best. Generally, we consider full sun to be 6 hours or more. Low light, I would say maybe 4 hours or more of sunlight, but you should definitely be able to read by whatever light you're dealing with. So and any light you're dealing with inside a house, unless you're right in a very sunny window that's facing right directly into the east or the west, it's going to be kind of indirect filtered light. And again, that's totally fine. What you're going to look for is, what direction do my windows face, and how many hours of the day am I getting sunlight for? 6 hours or more, you're looking at a full light situation. 4 hours, you're kind of looking at a low light situation. And if you're getting no, you know what, there probably are plants that would thrive there, but I don't know them off the top of my head. So let me know if that's your situation.
Diana asked, how much larger should your new pot be when you plant up?
Oh, that's such a good question. So Diana wants to know, how much larger should your new pot be when you pot up? So that's a great question. So the first thing to know is, what kind of a plant am I dealing with? How big is my plant going to get? Because if you are going to be potting up a plant that could get quite large, you might as well jump into a bigger pot. So looking at this guy right here, he's pretty much, as soon as, he gets his feet underneath him from being potted up, he could pretty rapidly fill this pot. I didn't jump up too much in size, but I could put this spider plant in my hanging basket, and I think I might do that because I do love spider plants in hanging baskets. It'll just take a little bit longer for it to fill out. You also want to take a look at how rapidly your plant grows. Some plants, especially ones that do well in low light, are fairly slow growing. So you might want to consider putting that one not into a much larger pot, maybe stick to a little bit smaller because it's going to look a little bit fuller more quickly. But if you've got a fast grower, and I know oxalis is a pretty fast grower, it can fill out a much larger pot fairly rapidly. So that's what you kind of want to think about is, how fast is your plant going to grow? How big is it ultimately going to get? Anything else? Oh, okay. Growing succulents. I had somebody email me about how to best grow succulents. They are the cool plant to have in your windowsill right now. And succulents, and the reason for that is that succulents are fairly easy to grow. They don't require much in the way of soil fertility, and they don't require much in the way of water. They do like good, strong sunlight. So if what you're hoping to grow is a succulent or a cactus, and so those are, fleshy plants that are evolved to live in dry deserts, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get either potting soil mix, if you've already got that on hand, or a cactus mix it with some sand, and plant your succulent in that kind of soil. It's going to drain really well. You only really need to water once a week in the summer, once every 2 weeks in the winter, but make sure you've got that plant in a nice sunny spot because it's going to really value that good direct light. Any other questions? Not yet? This is your moment, everybody.
Diana points out that philodendron also and pathos do well in low light.
They do, yes. Pothos and philodendron both do very well in low light, and that does come back to their origin as a tropical or semi-tropical plant. I can't stress this enough. I do hear from people who say, I would really love to have houseplants, but my house is just too dim. There are absolutely plants out there that will do well in that scenario. I can tell you pothos and snake plant, both really nice. Snake plant is an oxygenator, so it's good for recirculating the air in your home. Both of those do very well with very low light situations. So it's really important before you go out and, pick whatever plant looks the nicest at the garden shop or wherever you may happen to be getting your plants right now, that you do just a little bit of homework to see what plant, is going to be right for the light level in your home. And I am also posting a blog on the Tyler Arboretum blog that'll go into more depth about everything I'm talking about right now, including plants for different light levels on Monday or Tuesday of next week. So
Julia was given a basket of troughs, and now they're grown out. What should she do?
Grown out, meaning they're overflowing the basket? Sure. So a really great thing to do in that situation is to look up how to divide. So the question is, what should I do with plants that have just totally overgrown the basket that they're in right now? A really great thing to do is to look into how well that particular plant divides. So take your plant, do a little bit of homework and see what you need to do to divide it. Most plants are fairly simple. You just take a look at the crown of the plant and see where you've got what are called growth nodes where you can divide the plant up, and then you literally will just kind of cut it along those spots or pull it apart. And then you can pot them up into any size container you think is appropriate. And, either you have 4 plants where before you had 1, or you can give them to friends. So I think that's a really nice thing to do. It does tend to rejuvenate plants a little bit. I know in particular a really nice plant, if you're a fan of anything that smells nice and minty, is Corsican mint. Very low growing, fairly low maintenance, works well as a house plant, really benefits from being divided. It's just that action of pulling apart the roots really forces it to push some new growth and gets it some new soil. It just is a nice rejuvenation. But always do a little bit of research on the particular kind of plant you're dealing with before you divide it, because some plants do not care for that at all. Or if they don't mind it, but it might take them a while to look like something again. So make sure you're doing your homework on your particular plant. Any other questions?
Julia asked, do I need to change frequency in fertilizing from summer to winter?
Yes. Do you need to change frequency in fertilization between summer and winter when you're changing your watering schedule? Definitely. So that's a great question. For the most part, if you're looking at fertilizing your houseplants, personally, I don't do it more than once a year, twice a year maybe. And again, what I'm putting down is sort of a slow release fertilizer like Osmocote is really nice. Or you might be able to fertilize a little bit more frequently with like a fish oil. I tend to stay away from Miracle-Gro. I think it does a really nice job of making them look nice immediately, but I don't think it has like the staying power of something that's going to be a slow release. So when you're changing your watering schedule and your fertilizing schedule, you're assuming that your plants are going to have kind of a dormant period in the winter. And all plants have some sort of dormancy period, even if the temperature isn't changing a ton. It's very easy to see that in our own gardens because our perennial plants will grow like crazy in the summertime and die back to the ground in the winter. Your houseplants are doing the same thing, they're just not dying back. They're growing much more slowly or not at all during the winter months. So during that time, it tends to be a little cooler in our homes, a little bit less light. You're going to want to water less, and don't worry too much about fertilizing at that point. Give it a good feed in the spring, and then maybe again as fall is coming around, and that should set your plant for the year. Great question, though. Any other questions?
Andrew's mom wants to know how to care for herb plants like basil, parsley, thyme, rosemary.
What a fabulous question. Andrew's mom just messaged, how do you take care of herb plants? That is such a great question, and I think it gets to the whole point of growing your own food and your own herbs in containers. Herb plants are very easy to take care of. The two things you want to make sure you're doing are you're going to need to fertilize them a little bit more than you would just, a begonia or any other house plant, because they are producing food for you to eat. You are also going to want to be pinching them back regularly. Most herb plants, good point. My cameraman just went, what does that mean? Which is a really good reminder for me. Pinching them back is when you are picking your herbs to use them. Some plants like basil, if you are harvesting from it, it'll never go to flower. If it goes to flower, it gets more bitter. So you're always going to want to be cutting back your herbs, not all the way, but enough that you can take whatever it is you want to cook. But the plan is always sort of pushing new growth, because those are the most flavor is going to come out of the new growth. So fertilize a little bit more. Make sure you've got it in a nice container, pot up or divide if needed, and make sure you're pinching back, and make sure that the pot is not too dry. So I haven't talked too much about water requirements because it is different from plant to plant, but a good rule of thumb is if you take a look at your pot, you should get to know the weight of it. Now, obviously, a terracotta pot is going to be a little bit heavier, but get to know what it feels like dry and what it feels like moist. And just periodically do a pot check and lift it up. If it's feeling too light, you might need to give it a drink. The exception to that, of course, being succulents that like to dry out completely before the next water. So get to know what your particular kind of plant is. And on my blog post that we're going to be putting up, so if you're the kind of person who's like, I will forget to water this plant, there are plants that still will do really well in your home. Vegetable plants, as it is for herbs. Yes, again, vegetable plants can absolutely be grown in containers. I recommend growing them outside rather than inside your home. But my best recommendation there is make sure you have the right size container for the plant you're growing. So a tomato needs a much bigger container than a head of lettuce. And they definitely will need more fertilization than your standard potted plant because they are producing food. So make sure you kind of check in with your particular crop. Tomatoes and peppers are very heavy feeders. Make sure you're giving them a good moisture or good fertilization. I like to do it once before I put them in the ground, and then once kind of in the middle of the season. Next question.
Chase asks, what types of fertilizers do you use on herbs and how?
Great question. How much? Chase asks, what kind of fertilizer do I like to use on herbs and how much? That's a really great question, and I could probably spend the next hour talking about that realistically, because there is a lot of debate over whether an organic fertilizer is better or an inorganic fertilizer, slow release versus quick release. With a food plant, personally, I like to stay more on the organic side because I think it's just then you don't have to worry as much, right? And the stronger fertilizer you put down, the more you risk burning delicate leaves. So for a food plant, what I really like to do, food and herbs, is fish oil. Fish oil is like go juice for plants. It's got tons of stuff in there that is really good, really going to set your plants up for success. Generally, it's about a capful in the water that you're using to water it, but check on the container and it'll give you exact recommendations based on what you're growing. Definitely a vegetable plant will need more, whereas like a spider plant will need less. I also really recommend if you are doing tomatoes or peppers, that you include something that's got calcium in it. That's really important for them. I cannot tell you how many times I get the question, what is wrong with my tomato? And what it has is blossom end rot. And that looks really serious, but it's super quick and easy to solve. A little bit of calcium takes care of it, does the trick. If you don't feel like buying a special fertilizer with calcium, take your eggshells from breakfast, crush that up in the soil. Quick, slow release form of calcium. Next question.
Julia agrees with fish emulsion.
Yes, I love Julia agrees with fish emulsion. Fish oil emulsion is it does have a bit of a smell. That's the only drawback to it. It smells a little bit fishy because it's made with fish oil, but it is full of good stuff for plants. At Tyler, we also use Osmocote a lot. That is a slow release fertilizer. The benefit there is that fish oil kind of throws it all into the soil right away, whereas Osmocote releases it slowly. If you also happen to be somebody who composts, I compost in my backyard. No reason you couldn't use that if you were using an herb plant or a vegetable plant, something outside though, because again, that might have some wildlife that you wouldn't want to bring into your home. Next question. Okay. Let's see. Oh, compost tea. Wanted to talk about that real quick. Compost tea is a nice way to kind of water in nutrients without watering in wildlife. So if you have access to compost tea, that's a nice thing to use. But again, I think it's going to kind of do compost tea is sort of the watery part of the compost that contains a lot of the nutrients that are in the main bulk of it. You should all thank my cameraman for slowing me down when I start to use words that are maybe super familiar to those of us who garden, but might not be to those of us who do not. So yeah, compost tea is a nice one if you have access to it. I do think it's going to accomplish a lot of the same stuff as using a fish oil supplement. Next question.
Julia asks, what do you think about polishing leaves?
What do I think about polishing leaves? That's a great question. So houseplants are there for aesthetics, right? They're there to make our home look nice and to, that they're a part of your decor. But they're also living organisms. So I tend to stay away from anything that is trying to artificially enhance the image of a plant. I think it's fine to pick off dead leaves, pick off leaves that look damaged, but I like to stay away from altering them too much. Let it be what it is. If you like a plant that has a very polished looking leaf, pick a plant that has that already so that you don't have to do anything else to it. A note about picking off dead leaves, especially with plants like ferns, that's a really nice thing to do, kind of refresh and rejuvenate the plant. If you think about if it's living out in the wild, those dead leaves are going to get blown away, they're going to get eaten off, they're going to get picked off, so pull them off of your plant. It'll make it look a little bit healthier and happier, maybe force a little bit of new growth. But I like to stay away from doing anything to my plants that wouldn't happen to them out in the wild. These are living, breathing organisms, and they are, a part of our home, and I like to let them be what they are. Next question.
Not a question, but thank you for the text. Did herbs usually get burned because fertilizers in the water?
Yes, I just got thanked for a tip on putting down too strong a fertilizer and burning your plant. Yes, that's another reason why I like fish oil. It's fairly gentle, so the risk of burning is lower. But yeah, if you put down too strong a fertilizer, and the same is true out in your backyard or on any of your perennial plants in your garden, too much at once. So most fertilizers have like a nitrogen phosphorus ratio. Too strong a ratio will burn your plant, whether it's grass, perennial, or house plant. So you definitely want to make sure that what you're putting down is nice and gentle and the right thing for the plant you're dealing with. So yeah, fish oil is a nice one. Okay. Any more questions? Now is your moment. All right. Okay. All right. Next question. Moving your plant around in the winter time. So the question I'm getting is it important to take your house plant and relocate it to a different spot when winter rolls around? And to answer that question, I think you would need to look at where you have it in the first place. So like I said, most houseplants are tropical or semi-tropical in nature, which means they don't like radical temperature fluctuations and they do not care for the cold. So take a look at your window. If your window is drafty and chilly in the wintertime, you might want to move your plant in a little bit. For the most part, they'll be okay because we tend to keep our our houses heated to a level that we're comfortable with, which is usually the level that houseplants are comfortable with. So in general, I don't think you need to move your plant a ton unless you've got it in a situation where your window is really drafty. One thing I do like to do is rotate my plants. So you can see my oxalis here is kind of growing in this direction, and that's because it was growing towards the sun. If you're growing outside, you just sort of grow straight up and the sun is there. But what I like to do with my houseplants is turn them periodically so that they're forced to kind of grow in the opposite direction because the direction of the light has changed. So that's a nice thing to do. It keeps your plant kind of nice and even on all sides while still giving it the light that it needs. Any more questions? How do you pot a moss garden? That's a very good question. From Charles? Yes, from Charles. Charles asks, how do you pot a moss garden? Moss is very easy to grow, provided you have the correct material for it to grow in. Moss is what's called a primary succession plant. So it can grow on virtually nothing. It has very, very, very small roots. So that's why you often see moss growing on bits of wood that have fallen in the forest, on stones. So you don't have, or roads. So you don't have to have a great soil to grow a moss garden. What you do need to have is steady moisture that's not waterlogged or dry. So if you've got your moss garden, what I recommend is a nice shallow pan, stone, a little bit of soil, and your moss, and then rather than pouring water all over it, come through with a mister and mist it periodically. That's going to give you your best success. Our last question from Julia.
What would you recommend for an absolute beginner with 3 to 4 hours of light now?
Okay, the question from Julia is, what would I recommend for an absolute beginner with 3 to 4 hours of light in their home? Great question. That is pretty low light, but they're, like I said, some plants that are going to do really nicely there for you. My best recommendation would be pothos, which is a lovely plant and very, very difficult to kill. It can survive very low light, and it can survive, I forgot to water it for 2 weeks. Snake plant is another really good one. I think snake plant has great presence. It has a very tall leaf, very nice variegation, can get quite large, so it can really have some presence in a room. And it's another one that does very well with pretty much whatever you happen to throw at it. So that's a good tough plant. Oxygenator. A spider plant is also another one that is really not going to ask too much from you. I have 2 cats, and they both have a deep love of eating plants. And I cannot tell you how many times I have rescued this little spider plant from being just completely pulled out of its pot and chewed to practically nothing. And if I pop it back in, give it some water, let it sit in the window, it will flush right back out and look lovely. So a spider plant is a very rewarding plant. It's another one that's an oxygenator. And it's also one that's super easy to propagate. Once it starts to get those little babies, you can cut those right off and you can just pop them right in soil, and you've got a whole nother spider plant that you can hang somewhere else in your home or give to a friend until they get so sick of you giving you them spider plants that they don't talk to you anymore. So that is the inherent risk of a spider plant. Any other questions? I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I love that we can get together virtually, even though we can't get together in person at the Arboretum. Gardens there. And if you happen to have a moment and the inclination, hop on over to Tyler Arboretum's website, www.tylerarboretum.org, and make a donation. These are difficult times, as we all know, and we've got hope. You can also buy a Tyler Arboretum membership, which rather than a one-time donation lets you go to the Arboretum whenever you want, and we're open because hopefully this pandemic will come to an end soon. But yeah, Tyler is a great community, and we're really happy to be able to come and help you with your home garden, even if you can't visit us in person at ours right now. Thank you so much. I hope to do more of these. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to jlo@tylerarboretum.org. Thank you guys so much.